Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's One for All was fueled by machines instead of energy. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop was a cold, indifferent thing. It tugged at the sleeves of Izuku Midoriya's black Kakurin, a stark contrast to the firestorm of despair raging within his chest. Below, the city of Muzidafu sprawled out like a circuit board of glittering lights, each one a tiny, distant star representing a life, a dream, a quirk. From this height, they all blurred into an impersonal glow, a reflection of the crushing insignificance he felt. His own dream, once a brilliant sun that had warmed his entire existence, had just been extinguished. Snatched from the sky and stomped into the dirt by the very man who had inspired it. No. I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. The words echoed in his mind, not with the booming, confident cadence of a televised broadcast, but with the quiet, tired finality of a man delivering a medical diagnosis. They were a death sentence. They were the truth he had spent 14 years desperately, foolishly, trying to outrun. Izuku's shoulders slumped, the weight of a lifetime of mockery and pity pressing down on him. Kaken's explosive insults, the teacher's dismissive glances, the doctor's sterile, single-jointed finger pointing at the X-ray of his foot, it all coalesced into this one, singular moment of perfect, absolute defeat. He had chased a phantom, a childish fantasy, and had finally run full tilt into the brick wall of reality. He turned, his movements stiff and robotic, his all-might-themed backpack feeling like a leaden weight of irony. The hero himself was already at the rooftop door, his massive frame a silhouette against the stairwell's dim light. It's not wrong to dream, All Might said over his shoulder, his voice gentle now, laced with a sympathy that only made the ache in Izuku's chest sharpen. But you need to be realistic, kid. The door clicked shut, leaving Izuku alone with the wind and the ghost of his future. The sound was deafeningly final. Tears, hot and thick, finally broke free, tracing cold paths down his cheeks. He didn't bother to wipe them away. What was the point? His notebooks, filled with thousands of hours of meticulous analysis, suddenly felt like collections of fairy tales. His posters, his action figures, his entire life's passion, it was all just the sad memorabilia of a failed pilgrimage. He took a shuffling step towards the edge, his worn red sneakers scuffing against the gravel. He wasn't thinking of jumping. He was just adrift. He looked down at his hands, ordinary and quirkless, and saw them for what they were, useless. They couldn't generate fire or ice. They couldn't stretch or harden. They were just flesh and bone, incapable of changing the world, incapable of saving anyone. The memory of the sludge villain attack from earlier that day returned, a fresh wave of nausea and shame washing over him. He had run in, quirkless, powerless, useless. Deku had run in while the pro-heroes stood by, because his legs had moved on their own. And for what? He'd accomplished nothing. He had only gotten in the way, another problem for All Might to solve. He was a liability. A liability, he whispered, the words stolen by the wind. That's all I'll ever be. He was so lost in his own spiraling misery that he didn't hear the rooftop door groan open again. He didn't hear the heavy, tired footsteps approaching. He only registered a presence when a massive hand, far too large to be anything but a caricature, landed gently on his shoulder. Izuku flinched, spinning around with a choked gasp. Standing there, impossibly, was All Might. But not the hero he had just seen. A plume of steam erupted from the man's body with a sound like a deflating tire, and in its place stood a skeletal wraith. The iconic V-shaped hair drooped into a shaggy, unkempt mane. The permanent smile was gone, replaced by a grim line set in a gaunt, hollow-cheeked face. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, a dark red stain against his pale skin. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process the grotesque transformation. Wahoo! You're an imposter! A fake! The skeletal man wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I assure you, I am All Might, he said, his voice a weary rasp, a pale imitation of its former glory. The steam dissipated, revealing a baggy white t-shirt and cargo pants that hung loosely on his emaciated frame. He coughed, a racking, painful sound that seemed to shake his entire body. That form you know, It's just a facade now. A flex. Like a guy at the pool sucking in his gut to look good. He lifted his shirt, and Izuku's stomach lurched. But it wasn't the grotesque, starburst-shaped scar he might have expected from the stories of a villain fight. There was no mangled flesh. Instead, set into the man's chest just over his sternum, was a circular plate of dark, burnished metal about the size of a fist. It was cracked, spider-webbing fractures running across its surface. Through those cracks, a faint, sickly blue light pulsed erratically, like a dying firefly. A quiet, rhythmic clicking and whirring sound emanated from it, occasionally sputtering into a grinding noise that made Izuku cringe. Thin, insulated wires snaked out from under the plate, disappearing beneath his skin. It looked like a piece of ancient, failing machinery that had been violently grafted into a human body. 5 years ago, All Might began, his voice low and heavy with a long-nursed sorrow. A villain did this to me. He didn't just destroy my stomach. He didn't just damage my respiratory system, he tried to rip out my very core. He tapped a bony finger against the cracked metal plate. The blue light within flickered violently. This is the source of my power. This is one for all. Izuku could only stare, his own despair momentarily forgotten, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering confusion. One for all? Why you mean, your quirk? It's a machine? All Might shook his head, a wry, tired smile gracing his lips. Not a quirk, kid. Not in the way you think. It's technology. A symbiotic, self-replicating nanomechanical colony, a relic from a lost age, created just before the dawn of quirks as a sort of fail-safe. A way to empower the powerless. Its real name, its technical designation, is the Engine of Heroes. The words were so far beyond the realm of possibility that Izuku's analytical mind struggled to find a foothold. Nanites? Lost technology? An engine? It sounded like something out of a pre-quirk sci-fi comic. The engine stockpiles power. All Might continued, his gaze distant, as if he were reciting an ancient text. But not the way a battery stores a charge. Each user cultivates it, refines it, and when they pass it on, it carries more than just raw strength. It carries knowledge, experience, blueprints, combat data. It's an ever-evolving legacy of heroism, encoded in a machine no bigger than your heart. He looked Izuku dead in the eye, his sunken blue irises burning with an intensity that defied his frail appearance. I can pass this power on. And kid, after what I saw you do today, I want to pass it on to you. The world tilted on its axis. The wind, the city lights, the cold concrete under his feet, it all faded into a roaring static in Izuku's ears. Him? A successor? To All Might? The offer was so monumentally absurd, so ludicrously wonderful, that it had to be a dream. A hallucination brought on by grief and oxygen deprivation. Me? He squeaked, his voice cracking. But I'm quirkless. You said I couldn't be a hero. I said you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. All Might corrected gently. What I'm offering you isn't a quirk. It's a tool. A responsibility. And your quirklessness, that's not a weakness, kid. It's a requirement. He gestured to his own chest. The engine is an invasive system. It has to integrate with the host's biology, their nervous system, their very cells. In a body that already has a quirk, the two systems would conflict. It would be like trying to install two different operating systems on the same hard drive. The biological rejection would be catastrophic. The body would tear itself apart. It needs a blank slate. A clean install. It needs someone like you, Izuku Midoriya. All Might knew his name. The number one hero knew his name. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of questions. But how? How do you pass it on? Do I swallow some part of it? The image of him eating a microchip flashed through his head. All Might chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. No, nothing so crude. It's more of a hardware transfer. He rolled up the sleeve of his baggy shirt, revealing a forearm that was just as shockingly thin as the rest of him. On the inside of his wrist, where a watch might be worn, was another, smaller metallic plate. He pressed his thumb to the center of it. With a soft click and a hiss of pneumatics, A small panel slid open, revealing a recessed slot. The engine is constantly replicating, maintaining a single, viable seed core for the next generation, he explained. A soft blue light began to glow from within the slot. This core contains the entirety of the One for All OS, the sum of all its stockpiled knowledge and potential, ready to be implanted in a new host. With his other hand, he reached into the slot and carefully retrieved a small, metallic sphere no larger than a marble. It rested in his palm, pulsating with a soft, internal light. It wasn't just glowing, it was alive. Within the sphere's translucent shell, countless points of light swirled and danced like a miniature galaxy, a universe of data held in the palm of his hand. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was hope, given physical form. "This is it, kid," All Might said, his voice solemn. "The legacy of 8 heroes before me. The power to save. The burden of a symbol. I'm offering you a chance. Not an easy one. The integration process is difficult. The training required to handle the output will be the hardest thing you've ever done. But if you're willing, you can be a hero." Izuku stared at the seed core. It hummed softly, a low thrum of unimaginable power that he could feel vibrating in the air. This was it. The crossroads. The 1 in a billion chance he never knew existed. Everything in him screamed yes. The hero-worshipping child, the determined analyst, the desperate boy on a rooftop, they all screamed in a unified chorus. Tears streamed down his face again, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of overwhelming, painful, brilliant hope. "I'll do it," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I'll accept it. I'll do whatever it takes." A genuine, wide smile broke across All Might's skeletal face, and for a moment, the hero of old shone through the broken vessel. "I knew you'd say that. I had a feeling the moment I saw you run toward that villain." He closed his hand around the core. "Then our work begins tomorrow. Your journey to inheriting my power, and learning to become your own mechanic." The next 10 months were a brutal, relentless, and glorious reinvention of Izuku Midoriya. His life, once defined by school, hero-gazing, and quiet endurance, was now a carefully managed schedule of intense, mind and body-breaking labor. It began not with weights or cardio, but with a trip to a municipal library. All Might, in his civilian guise of Toshinori Yagi, met him there, looking even more frail and unassuming under the fluorescent lights. He didn't lead Izuku to the fitness section. Instead, he piled a table high with thick, intimidating textbooks. "Your body is the hardware," Toshinori explained, his voice a low whisper that barely carried over the rustling of pages. "You need to strengthen it, of course, but the engine, One for All, is the most sophisticated software in the world. If you want to be its operator and not just its host, you need to learn the language it speaks." The book titles were daunting: Fundamentals of Biomechanical Engineering, Neural Interface Theory, Advanced Materials Science, Applied Thermodynamics and Heat Dissipation, Introduction to Quantum Coding. It was a college-level curriculum, and it was now his homework. Every night, after a day of school, Izuku's room was a fortress of knowledge. He devoured the books, his mind, so adept at analyzing quirks, now latching onto the concrete principles of science and engineering. He filled new notebooks, not with hero sketches, but with schematics. He theorized about the engine's power source, about the nature of the nanites, about the potential failure points. His mother Inko watched with a mixture of pride and bewilderment as her son's obsession shifted from capes to capacitors. The physical training was just as grueling. Their gym was Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a once beautiful coastline that had become an illegal dumping ground over the years. Mountains of rusted appliances, defunct electronics, and discarded furniture choked the shoreline, a testament to societal neglect. "Heroes these days are all about the flashy stuff," Toshinori said, standing atop a mountain of trash, the sea breeze whipping through his blonde bangs. "But the core of heroism is service, community improvement. You will restore this coastline. You will move all of this, by yourself. This will build the body necessary to house the engine." But the task had a dual purpose, and more importantly, Toshinori added, a glint in his eye, "this is your workshop. Your parts depot." Izuku's training became a unique blend of strongman and scrap heap engineer. He would spend 2 hours hauling refrigerators and washing machines, his muscles screaming in protest, his body pushed to its absolute limit. Then, he would spend the next 2 hours with a toolkit Toshinori had provided, hunched over a broken generator or a discarded scooter engine. "The engine is a machine, young Midoriya," Toshinori would lecture, pointing to a diagram Izuku had drawn in the sand. "And all machines need maintenance. They overheat. They short-circuit. Servos burn out." The previous users, many of us were not engineers. We learned through painful, damaging trial and error. I want you to be better. You must understand the principles of what's happening inside you. Izuku learned to diagnose a faulty circuit board scavenged from a microwave. He spent a week painstakingly repairing a small diesel generator, his hands covered in grease and grime. When it finally sputtered to life with a cough of black smoke, the triumphant roar of the engine was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. He learned to weld, to solder, to read wiring diagrams. He was not just cleaning a beach, he was disassembling and reassembling the modern world, piece by piece. Toshinori was his mentor in all things. He would push Izuku through one more set of pull-ups on a rusted pipe, then quiz him on the principles of thermodynamics. He provided old, heavily redacted maintenance logs from the 7th user, Nana Shimura. Her notes were filled with observations about system overloads and her attempts to manage heat output. He even had fragmented data from the users before her, each one adding a piece to the puzzle of One for All. Izuku's perspective on heroes began to shift. He saw them now not as gods with magical powers, but as complex systems. He watched videos of Endeavor and mentally calculated the immense heat waste his body must be producing. He saw best geniuses manipulating fibers and imagined the sophisticated microservos and processing power required. His hero analysis notebooks evolved from fanboy worship to detailed technical breakdowns. Mount Lady's gigantification, suspected cellular expansion via programmable matter. Query: what is the power source? How is mass conserved? Must be drawing from an alternate energy source or converting local matter. High risk of structural instability without a reinforced skeletal structure. The 10 months passed in a blur of sweat, oil, and ink. The beach was slowly, miraculously cleared. The mountains of trash vanished, replaced by clean sand and open space. And Izuku himself was transformed. He was no longer a scrawny, timid boy. He was lean and corded with hard-earned muscle, his shoulders broader, his posture confident. His hands were calloused, his mind sharp, filled with a new and powerful kind of knowledge. On the final morning, the day of the UA entrance exam, he stood with Toshinori on the pristine beach. The sun was rising over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The air was clean, smelling only of salt and possibility. Izuku had done it. He had moved mountains. "You've done well, my boy," Toshinori said, his voice thick with pride. He looked healthier, stronger, as if Izuku's own progress had somehow revitalized him. "You've prepared the vessel. You've studied the schematics. You've more than earned this." He held out his hand. Resting in his palm was the seed core, the tiny galaxy of light that had haunted Izuku's dreams for 10 months. It seemed to pulse in time with his own frantic heartbeat. "This is your last chance to turn back," Toshinori said, his expression deadly serious. "The integration will be unpleasant. The nanites will physically rebuild parts of your internal structure. They will graft the engine's core to your sternum and spine, weaving its systems through your own. It will feel cold, then hot, and it will hurt. There is no guarantee of success. But if it works, you will hold the power of One for All." Izuku looked from the core to his mentor's face, then out at the rising sun. He thought of the taunts, the pity, the hopelessness. He thought of the feeling of running towards danger, his body moving on its own. He thought of his dream, not dead, but reborn, redesigned with steel and wire and code. There was no hesitation. There was no fear. There was only resolve. "I'm ready," he said, his voice clear and steady. Toshinori nodded. "Then let's begin the inheritance protocol." Izuku sat cross-legged on the sand, his back straight. He took a deep, centering breath, the salt air filling his lungs. Toshinori knelt before him, holding the seed core with a surgeon's care. "Place your hand over your heart," he instructed. Izuku did so, feeling the thumping of his own biological engine against his palm. The core is key to my biosignature. It will remain inert until it detects a suitable, quirkless host in a state of willing acceptance. When I place it on your chest, it will do the rest. Do not fight it. Focus on your dream. Focus on the hero you want to become. Give the engine a goal to work towards. Izuku closed his eyes and did as he was told. He pictured himself in a hero costume, not just a copy of All Might's, but his own. He imagined pulling people from rubble, shielding them from harm, telling them that everything was going to be okay with a smile. He poured every ounce of his ambition, every drop of his 14 years of yearning, into that single, powerful image. He felt a strange pressure on his sternum, directly over his hand. Toshinori had placed the core there. For a moment, nothing happened. There was only the smooth, warm feeling of the metallic sphere against his knuckles. He felt a flicker of panic. Had it failed? Was he not worthy? And then it began. A profound, impossible cold bloomed in his chest, so intense it felt like a burn. It was the chilling cold of liquid nitrogen, of the void of space. It seeped through his hand, through his ribs, sinking deep into his core. He gasped, his breath turning to white mist in the morning air. The seed core began to hum, the sound vibrating through his entire skeleton. It phased through his hand, his skin, his sternum, as if they weren't there. There was a horrifying, grinding sensation as the nanites activated, a million microscopic machines coming online at once. He could feel them spreading, a tide of freezing, intelligent dust flowing through his veins, mapping his circulatory system, his nervous system, his DNA. The cold was replaced by a blinding, internal heat. It felt as if a star had been ignited in his torso. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted behind his eyes. It was the pain of being unmade and remade, all at once. He could feel the nanites working, weaving a metallic lattice around his spine for support, reinforcing his bones with microscopic carbon fibers, and grafting the central core of the engine directly to his sternum. It was a brutal, invasive, miraculous act of biological engineering. He cried out, his body arching back, his muscles seizing. Through the agony, he clung to the image of the hero he wanted to be. It was his anchor in a sea of fire and ice. I want to save people. I want to be a hero. I will not fail. Just as he felt his consciousness was about to shatter, a new sensation emerged. A low, steady, powerful thrumming from his chest, deeper and more resonant than his own heartbeat. It was the rhythm of a perfectly calibrated machine. The pain receded, leaving behind a strange tingling in all his limbs. He opened his eyes, panting, his body drenched in sweat. He looked down. There was no mark, no scar. But he could feel it, a weight in his chest. A hum of latent power, and in the top left corner of his vision, as if projected onto the inside of his own eye, blinking green text flickered into existence. System initializing. Host biology stable. Neural interface, synchronizing. 9%. Welcome, 9th. The text faded. The world rushed back in. The sound of the waves, the warmth of the sun, the concerned face of Toshinori leaning over him. Kid? You with me? Talk to me, young Midoriya. Izuku pushed himself up, his movements feeling strangely fluid, more efficient. He took a breath, and it felt deeper, richer. He looked at his hands, and they were still his hands, but he could feel a network of dormant power coiled within them, waiting for a command. He looked up at All Might, a true, genuine smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the smile of a fan meeting his idol. It was the smile of an apprentice who had just been handed the keys to the workshop. System online, Izuku said, his voice filled with a quiet, terrifying, and exhilarating awe. I'm ready for the exam. The gates of UA High were not just large, they were an architectural declaration. They loomed over the crowd of aspiring heroes, a colossal U and a framing an entrance that promised the future of greatness. For Izuku Midoriya, walking towards them was like approaching the threshold of a modern Olympus. For years, this path had been an impossible dream. Now it was just a path, a concrete walkway leading to the most important test of his life. He clutched the straps of his backpack, a nervous habit that had followed him from his past life into this strange new one. Deep within his chest, the engine of heroes was a quiet, dormant presence. It was a constant, low-frequency hum, a subtle vibration against his sternum that was both a comfort and a source of profound anxiety. It was the physical manifestation of the greatest secret in the world, ticking away inside him like an unexploded bomb. He could feel it, a subtle weight and warmth that wasn't his own, a passenger that had reconfigured his very biology. And in the periphery of his vision, a ghost of an image remained. A faint, translucent green box in the upper left corner of his sideline. It was his heads-up display, his HUD, currently in a power-saving standby mode. It displayed only the most basic information: his heart rate, a frantic 134 BPM, his internal temperature, a stable 37.0 degrees Celsius, and a single, blinking word: standby. It was a constant reminder that he was no longer just Izuku Midoriya. He was Izuku Midoriya, version 2.0, with hardware he hadn't even learned how to boot up properly. He joined the river of students flowing into the main auditorium. The air was electric with nervous energy, a cacophony of muttered self-assurances and the low crackle of barely contained quirks. A boy with engine-like exhausts protruding from his calves jogged in place. A girl with pink skin and strange, black scara eyes chatted excitedly with a friend who seemed to be made of rock. Everyone here had a power, a gift they had grown up with, a part of their identity. Izuku had a machine he'd acquired 10 hours ago, with a user manual written in a language he was only just beginning to decipher. He had never felt more like an imposter. The written portion of the exam was a surprising reprieve. The questions ranged from mathematics and literature to ethics and law, but after 10 months of force-feeding himself a college-level engineering curriculum under Tashinori's tutelage, the exam felt simple. His mind, honed by dissecting complex schematics and thermodynamic principles, cut through the problems with an efficiency that was new to him. He finished with time to spare, the quiet confidence of intellectual mastery a stark contrast to the churning sea of doubt in his gut about the trial to come. Then came the practical exam orientation. The auditorium lights dimmed, and a massive screen lit up behind a stage where the pro-hero present Mike stood, his signature high-collared jacket and directional speaker-like hair unmistakable. "Welcome to today's live performance, everybody!" he screamed, his voice amplified to a physical force that shook the seats. "Can I get a hey?" The auditorium was silent. Izuku, a lifelong hero fanboy, almost reflexively shouted back before clamping his hands over his mouth. "Tough crowd," President Mike mused, undeterred. "Alright, let's get straight to it. We'll be running a 10-minute simulated urban battle. You'll be dispatched to one of our massive battle centers, so pack your grit and get ready to rumble." The screen behind him displayed 4 silhouettes of robots, labeled with point values, 1, 2, and 3. "These are your targets, examinees. Foe villains of varying difficulty. Each one you scrap nets you points. Your goal is to use your quirk to rack up as many points as you can." Izuku leaned forward, his analytical mind kicking into gear automatically. He wasn't just seeing villain bots, he was seeing design specifications. The one-pointer was small, likely lightly armored, probably with exposed wiring near its single optic sensor. A quick, precise strike would be most efficient. The two-pointer was larger, bipedal, with thicker armor plating, but its leg joints looked like a potential weak point. The three-pointer was heavily armed and tracked, a miniature tank. Taking it head-on would be foolish. It would require exploiting its environment, or disabling its weapon systems first. His HUD flickered, the standby text momentarily replaced by analysis mode, offline. The engine was reacting to his thought process, trying to access a function he didn't know how to use. The hum in his chest intensified for a second before subsiding. "Easy, boy," he thought, feeling like a nervous rider on a temperamental new horse. "And do not, I repeat, do not attack other examinees. That's a one-way ticket to a big fat zero, you dig?" A tall, broad-shouldered student with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, his hand shooting into the air in a perfect, rigid chop. "Excuse me, sir. I have a question." "Hit me," President Mike yelled. "On the printout provided, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross oversight for an institution of UA's caliber," he declared, his voice booming with startling formality. He then turned, his arms swiveling to point directly at Izuku. And you, with the curly hair! You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. Heads turned. Izuku froze, a hot flush of shame creeping up his neck. Some things, it seemed, never changed. He was still the weird, muttering kid. He sank lower in his seat, stammering an apology. All right, Examinee 7111, thanks for the call-in. Present Mike said, saving him. The fourth villain type is the zero-pointer. He's an arena trap, a gimmick. Think of him like a thwomp from Super Mario. He's worth no points, so I recommend you run away. The lights came up, and Present Mike finished with a roaring plus ultra, and a piece of advice from Napoleon Bonaparte. Izuku barely heard it. His heart was hammering again, his internal systems reflecting his anxiety. HR, 145 BPM, the HUD helpfully informed him. He needed to get a grip. This wasn't just about him anymore. He was carrying the legacy of 8 other people inside his chest. The bus ride to Battle Center B was a blur of nervous faces. Izuku had changed into his tracksuit, the simple athletic wear feeling woefully inadequate compared to the custom gear some of the other students wore. He found himself standing next to the kind girl who had saved him from face-planting outside the gates. She was bouncing on the balls of her feet, a bright, positive energy radiating from her that was the polar opposite of his own coiled tension. I'm super nervous, aren't you? She said with a friendly smile. It's just so much. But we just have to do our best, right? Izuku, flustered by the sudden interaction with the girl, could only manage a series of incoherent stammers before the formal boy from the auditorium marched over and began lecturing him again about distracting the other contestants. He tuned them out, focusing inward. He tried to mentally reach for the engine. Tashinori had told him it was keyed to his will, his intent. Okay, engine, he thought, trying to project a sense of calm command. I need you to be ready. Just a little bit of power. Enough to disable a one-pointer. The hum in his chest remained unchanged. His HUD still read standby. There was no response. It was like trying to start a car with a dead battery. The potential was there, a V8 engine under the hood, but he didn't have the key for the ignition. The bus stopped. The massive gates of Battle Center B loomed before them, a sprawling cityscape of towering, empty buildings waiting to become their battlefield. As the students filed out, Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. And begin! The crowd was gone in an instant. A blur of motion and quirks as everyone surged into the city. The boy with engines in his legs shot off like a bullet. A blonde kid with a strange belt fired a laser from his navel. The kind girl was already touching robots, causing them to float helplessly into the air, and Izuku was left standing at the starting line, alone. What's wrong, listener? Present Mick's voice echoed. They don't give you a countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go! Panic, cold and familiar, seized him. He sprinted into the city, his legs pumping, his lungs burning. But this was just his own, unenhanced speed. It was nothing. He rounded a corner and saw a one-pointer bearing down on a terrified-looking student. Now! This is it! He skidded to a stop, planting his feet and pulling his right arm back, mimicking All Might's iconic pose. He focused all his will, all his intent, on his fist. Come on, activate! He grunted, squeezing his eyes shut. He felt nothing. The hum didn't change. The power didn't surge. He was just a boy with his fist cocked. The other student, one with a hardening quirk, simply punched the robot's head off and ran past, giving Izuku a confused look. What am I doing wrong? Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. He started running again, deeper into the city. He saw explosions in the distance, flashes of ice, the sounds of rending metal. Points were being scored. The exam was passing him by. He ducked into an alleyway, leaning against a cold brick wall to catch his breath. His HUD was now a cruel messenger of his own failure. HR, 168 BPM. Adrenaline, critical. Stress, 89%. The machine knew he was panicking, but it wasn't helping. It was just watching. It requires a strong will. Tashinori's voice echoed in his memory. Give the engine a go. His goal was to pass. To get points. To prove he was worthy. He focused on that. I need to destroy robots. I need to get points. He punched the air. Nothing. He tried a kick. Nothing. He tried to access the system menus he had seen in his dreams, the fragmented memories of past users, but his mind was a wall of static. Desperation began to curdle into despair. Maybe it had all been a mistake. Maybe the engine had rejected him after all. Maybe it knew he was just a fraud, a useless Deku playing dress-up. He was going to fail. He was going to get a 0. He was going to go home and tell All Might that his grand legacy, the sacred torch of heroism, had fizzled out in the hands of a worthless kid who couldn't even turn it on. The thought was so crushing it nearly brought him to his knees. He had cleaned an entire beach, studied until his eyes burned, rebuilt his body from the ground up, all for this? To fail at the first hurdle? To be the one user in 9 generations who couldn't even make the machine work? That's when the ground began to shake. It started as a low tremor, a deep vibration that rattled the windows in their frames. Then it grew into a violent quake, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the asphalt. A shadow fell over the alley, a moving eclipse that blotted out the sun. Izuku stumbled out onto the main street and looked up. And up. And up. The 0-pointer. Present mixed description hadn't done it justice. It wasn't a robot, it was a mobile skyscraper. A behemoth of green and gray metal that towered over the tallest buildings in the battle center. Its single, glowing red eye scanned the area with cold, predatory indifference. Each step it took was a miniature earthquake, its massive arms sweeping through buildings and reducing them to rubble. The other students were doing the smart thing. They were running, their faces pale with terror. It's the 0-pointer! Run for it! Someone screamed. Izuku's own instincts screamed the same thing. Run. Get away. It's worth nothing. It's just an obstacle. His legs, however, were frozen in place, his mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the machine before him. He saw access panels that were the size of city buses, hydraulic pistons as thick as ancient trees. The engineering that went into it was mind-boggling and terrifying. Then he heard a small cry of pain. His eyes snapped downwards. Near the base of the colossal machine, half buried under a pile of concrete and rebar from a collapsed building, was the kind, brown-haired girl from the entrance. Her leg was trapped, and she was looking up at the approaching 0-pointer with wide, terrified eyes. Something inside Izuku shifted. The panic, the fear of failure, the desperate need for points, it all vanished. Evaporated. It was replaced by a singular, deafeningly clear imperative that drowned out everything else. A line of code that became his entire world. She's going to die. His legs were moving. Just like with the sludge villain, he was running towards the danger, not away from it. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He didn't weigh the odds. There was only the image of her frightened face and the unstoppable machine about to crush her. Save her. It was not a request. It was not a hopeful plea. It was a command born from the deepest, most fundamental core of his being. It was the purest expression of the heroic spirit he had chased his entire life. And this time, the engine answered. Authorization key accepted. Selfless intent to protect. Initiating combat protocol. A surge of power, unlike anything he could have imagined, flooded his system. It wasn't hot like an explosion. It was cold and sharp, like liquid nitrogen being pumped directly into his veins. The hum in his chest erupted into a powerful, resonant thrum, the sound of a fusion reactor coming online. His HUD exploded with information. Green text scrolled past his vision at an unreadable speed. Schematics, power levels, trajectory calculations. A new gauge appeared on the right side of his vision, a vertical bar labeled output. It was currently at 0%, but as he sprinted towards the 0-pointer, it began to fill, climbing rapidly. 10%. 30%. 60%. He felt the nanites activate. It was a bizarre, tingling sensation, like his very cells were waking up and swarming. He watched in detached awe as his own right arm began to transform. The skin of his tracksuit sleeve seemed to dissolve, and the skin of his arm beneath it grew translucent. A network of glowing blue conduits became visible, and from them, A river of silvery, metallic particles flowed out, swarming over his limb. They moved with an alien intelligence, a swarm of microscopic builders. They formed a base layer of reinforced carbon plating around his forearm, then built upon it. Larger, interlocking plates of a titanium alloy shifted into place over his knuckles and the back of his hand. Tiny vents opened along the length of the newly formed gauntlet, releasing jets of pale blue coolant steam. Servos whirred, pistons primed. In the space of 3 seconds, his arm was no longer flesh and bone, but a masterwork of biomechanical engineering, a weapon of devastating power. The HUD locked onto a target, the 0-pointer's head. A red targeting reticle appeared, and data streamed beside it. Target, Class G Arena Obstacle. Armor composition, reinforced steel alloy. Structural weakness detected, cervical axis joint. The output gauge hit 100%. A new prompt blinked in the center of his vision. System ready? Execute, piston ram, Y/N. Izuku didn't need to think. He bent his knees, coiling his body like a spring, pouring every ounce of his 10 months of training into this one single moment. He leaped. The engine fired in unison. Small thrusters on the soles of his shoes, which he hadn't even known existed, ignited with a burst of force, launching him into the air. He soared upwards, 100 feet, 200 feet, climbing towards the robot's massive head like a missile. He drew his armored fist back. He could feel the power contained within it, a terrifying, exhilarating pressure. It was the weight of 8 lifetimes of heroism, focused into a single point. Yes! He screamed, the word both a physical shout and a mental command. The piston ram engaged. There was no explosion. There was only a deafening, high-pressure hiss. A massive piston, built in the core of the nanite gauntlet, fired forward, propelling his fist at supersonic speeds. The air in front of it compressed, shimmering with heat. His fist connected with the 0-pointer's jaw. The result was not a dent. It was a catastrophic system failure. The armored plating buckled, then shattered like glass. The impact sent a kinetic shockwave through the robot's entire chassis. Its head didn't just get knocked back. It was obliterated, exploding in a shower of shredded metal and sparking wires. The single red eye went dark as the entire upper torso was caved in by the sheer, focused force of the blow. The behemoth shuddered, its movements grinding to a halt. For a moment, it stood frozen, a monument to its own destruction. Then, with a groaning shriek of tortured metal, it began to topple backwards, away from the trapped girl. Izuku hung in the air for a fraction of a second, suspended at the apex of his jump, his fist still extended. He had done it. He had saved her. He had become a hero. Then came the consequence. Warning! Catastrophic system overload. The power vanished as quickly as it had come. The exhilarating cold was replaced by a searing, unimaginable heat that originated in his right arm. It was the pain of 1,000 circuits burning out at once, of metal melting inside his own body. He screamed, a raw, agonized sound that was drowned out by the noise of the falling robot. The beautiful, complex gauntlet on his arm glowed cherry red, then white hot. The vents that had been releasing coolant now spewed thick, black, acrid smoke. The interlocking plates warped and melted, dripping like molten solder before the nanites forcibly retracted, trying to salvage what they could. What they revealed was a ruin. His arm was a mangled wreck. The sleeve of his tracksuit was gone, incinerated. His skin was scorched and blackened in places, but in others, it was torn away, revealing the horrifying reality of the engine's substructure. Glowing red wires sparked and split. Pistons were fused in place. The metal plating that had been grafted to his bones was warped and discolored by the extreme heat. The limb was completely limp, useless, a piece of fried hardware hanging from his shoulder. His HUD became a nightmare of screaming red text. Right arm actuator, offline. Thermal levels, 1,200% of max. Coolant system failure. Structural integrity, compromised. Catastrophic overheat. System critical. Initiating emergency shutdown. The world began to spin. The power that had propelled him into the sky was gone. Gravity, patient and unforgiving, reclaimed him. He was 200 feet in the air, with a non-functional body and a crashing operating system. He was falling. The ground rushed up to meet him. He could see the shocked faces of the other examinees, including the girl he had just saved, who was now free. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for an impact he knew he wouldn't survive. He never hit the ground. A split second before he would have been turned into a red smear on the pavement, a hand slapped him across the face, and the sickening feeling of terminal velocity was replaced by a strange, weightless buoyancy. He cracked his eyes open. The brown-haired girl was standing below him, one hand outstretched, her face pale and strained. He was floating, inches from the ground, thanks to her quirk. Then, with a quiet groan, she pressed the tips of her fingers together. Her quirk released, and he fell the last few inches to the ground with a dull thud. The last thing he saw before the world went black was her concerned face leaning over him, and the final, fading error message on his internal display. System shutdown complete. Consciousness returned not as a gentle sunrise, but as a series of system reboots. The first sensation was a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from every fiber of his being, a phantom echo of the catastrophic overload. The second was the low, persistent hum in his chest, no longer a powerful thrum but a weak, sputtering whir, like a damaged fan struggling to spin. Then came the diagnostics. His internal display, the HUD, flickered to life in the blackness behind his eyelids. It was no longer a clean, crisp green, but a glitchy, artifact-filled mess of amber and red text, like a corrupted video file. Emergency reboot sequence initiated. Core power, 2%. Critical. Diverting auxiliary bioenergy. Primary sensors online. Neural interface stable. Hardware diagnostic. Running. Error, 72 failures detected. Right arm manipulator subsystem. Catastrophic failure. Status offline. Coolant pump A13 fused. Status offline. Energy conduit R7 short-circuited. Status offline. Microservo cluster, right arm, burnout detected. Status offline. Kinetic discharge piston warped. Structural integrity 4%. Dangerously unstable. The list scrolled on and on, a horrifyingly detailed autopsy report of his own limb. He wasn't just injured. He was broken. A piece of exquisitely complex machinery that had been redlined past its breaking point and had subsequently melted down. Izuku forced his eyes open. The world swam into focus slowly. He wasn't in a hospital room. The ceiling was high, industrial gray, crisscrossed with thick ventilation shafts and exposed wiring conduits. The air didn't smell of sterile antiseptic, but of ozone, machine oil, and hot metal, a smell that, after the last 10 months, he associated with work and progress. He was lying on a padded workbench, not a bed, and the light was the harsh, shadowless glare of workshop fluorescence. He tried to sit up, a groan escaping his lips. A sharp, grinding pain shot through his right shoulder, and he fell back with a gasp. He turned his head and finally looked at his arm. It was laid out beside him on a sterile blue cloth, exposed and horrifying. The scorched flesh was gone, cleaned away somehow. What remained was a skeletal framework of dark, metallic alloy, interwoven with bundles of synthetic muscle fiber, and a tangled rat's nest of wires. Some wires were blackened and frayed, their insulation vaporized. The central piston mechanism he had used to destroy the zero-pointer was visibly warped, its polished chrome finish now a dull, heat-blued mess. A thin, acrid smoke still wafted from a particularly nasty-looking junction box near his elbow. It looked like the aftermath of an electrical fire, a piece of equipment that any sane mechanic would immediately tag for scrap. "I wouldn't move that if I were you." The voice was gruff, tired, and belonged to a man in a bulky, yellow, vaguely insect-like exosuit, minus the helmet. Pro-hero, excavation hero, power loader. He was leaning against a nearby tool-laden cart, his arms crossed, a weary but intensely curious expression on his face. Standing beside him, looking profoundly bewildered, was Yue's resident nurse, recovery girl. She held her signature syringe cane, but her usual chipper demeanor was replaced with a frown of utter befuddlement. "His biological readings are fine," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "Minor bruising, exhaustion, signs of shock. My quirk healed all of that in an instant, but this..." She gestured vaguely at Izuku's ruined arm. "This is not a biological injury. My quirk is designed to amplify the body's natural healing process. But you can't heal a burnout motor. It's like asking me to kiss a broken television and expect it to work. Izuku's heart sank. He had always known, intellectually, that Recovery Girl's power wouldn't work on the engine, but hearing it confirmed, seeing the look on her face, the look of a master craftsman presented with a material she could not shape, made the reality of his situation crash down on him. There was no magic cure. There was no easy fix. Power Loader pushed himself off the cart and walked over, his footsteps heavy on the concrete floor. He picked up a delicate-looking diagnostic tool, a multimeter with a dozen different probes, and gently touched it to one of the exposed wires in Izuku's forearm. It beeped pathetically. Taishinori, All Might, gave me a heavily redacted file on you, kid, Power Loader said, not looking up from his readings. His voice was all business. Said you were a special case, that your quirk had unique maintenance requirements. He snorted. Unique is one word for it. This isn't a quirk, it's a bleeding-edge biomechanical prosthesis grafted to your entire nervous system. The tech in this arm alone is about 50 years ahead of anything I've ever seen. Where in the hell did you get it? Izuku's throat was dry. I can't say, sir. The first rule of One for All was that you didn't talk about One for All. Power Loader grunted, accepting the non-answer. He put the multimeter down. Well, the good news is, your core processor seems to have survived the meltdown. The bad news is, your entire right peripheral system is fried. Utterly, spectacularly fried. I've seen factory accidents that were less of a mess. He finally looked Izuku in the eye, his expression grim. Recovery Girl can't fix you. I can't fix you. I don't have the schematics, the proprietary tools, or frankly, the clearance to perform invasive surgery on what appears to be a national secret walking around in a teenager's body. A cold dread, heavier and more real than his post-exam panic, settled in Izuku's stomach. So, what happens now? Is it broken forever? The thought of losing the power just after he had finally managed to grasp it was unbearable. That, Power Loader said, gesturing to a rolling steel cart beside the workbench, is up to you. On the cart was a collection of tools that made Izuku's breath catch in his throat. Not the crude, scavenged wrenches and screwdrivers he'd used on the beach. This was high-end, precision equipment, a digital soldering station with a hair-thin tip. A set of magnetized, non-conductive picks and spudgers. Spools of specialized, self-insulating wiring. A handheld oscilloscope. And in the center of it all, a tablet displaying a live, incredibly detailed diagnostic of his own internal systems. The very same error log he had seen on his HUD. According to All Might's file, Power Loader continued, the user is responsible for their own maintenance. He said you'd know what to do. Frankly, I thought he was crazy, but looking at the wear patterns on your hands and the grease under your nails, maybe he wasn't. He tapped the tablet. This is a direct feed from your chest thingy. It's broadcasting this diagnostic on a secure, encrypted frequency. You're the only one who can fix this, Midoriya. So, the question is, can you? Izuku stared at the tools, then at the mangled mess of his own arm. He was a boy who had, a few months ago, been struggling to repair a lawnmower engine. Now he was being asked to perform microsurgery on the most advanced piece of technology on the planet, which just so happened to be a part of his own body. It was an impossible, terrifying task, but as he looked at the diagnostic on the tablet, something clicked. The jumble of error codes wasn't just gibberish. He recognized the terminology. Energy conduit R7. He knew from Nana Shimura's logs that the R-series conduits were primary power lines. Coolant pump A13. The auxiliary pumps were notoriously susceptible to backflow pressure during high-output events. He wasn't just looking at a broken machine. He was looking at a problem, and for the first time in his life, he might actually have the tools and knowledge to solve it. He took a shaky breath. I think I can try, Recovery Girl sighed, shaking her head. This is highly irregular. A student performing surgery on himself. He's not a regular student, and this isn't regular surgery. Power Loader countered. This is our only option. I'll supervise. Make sure he doesn't accidentally electrocute himself or set the building on fire. He turned back to Izuku. The workshop is yours. Just try not to break yourself any further. With that, the two teachers left him, sliding a heavy industrial door shut and leaving Izuku alone in the vast, echoing space of UA's development studio. The room was a paradise of machinery. Lathes, 3D printers, CNC mills, and countless workbenches littered with half-finished projects and strange-looking support gear. For a moment, the engineer in him was awestruck. Then, the reality of his task crashed back down. He spent the first hour just studying. He cross-referenced the diagnostic on the tablet with the physical damage to his arm, gently probing the burnt wires with a non-conductive pick. His left hand, clumsy and unfamiliar with the fine motor skills required, trembled as he worked. It was slow, painstaking work. He identified the fused coolant pump, a tiny, thumb-sized turbine that was now a single, melted lump of plastic and metal. He located the short-circuited conduit, a thick, coppery wire that had been vaporized in the middle, its ends blackened and curled. The scale of the repair was overwhelming. It would take weeks, maybe months, to source the materials and fabricate the replacement parts, let alone install them. And the entrance ceremony was in a week. He would have to show up on his first day of school with a non-functional, exposed robotic arm. The shame of it was a bitter pill. He decided to start small. The most critical failure, according to the logs, was a break in the primary neurofeedback loop. A tiny, hair-thin wire that connected the sensors in his fingertips to the engine's main processor had been severed. Without it, the entire arm was essentially numb to the system, unable to receive commands or send data. If he could just fix that one connection, he could at least get the arm back online in a low-power state. He found the break, a microscopic gap near his wrist joint. The task was simple in theory: bridge the gap with a tiny drop of solder. In practice, it was a nightmare. He had to use his non-dominant left hand to operate the soldering iron, bringing its superheated tip into a space crowded with other delicate, functional wires, any of which could be catastrophically damaged by a single slip. He took a deep breath, lowered the magnifying goggles attached to the workbench, and brought the tip of the soldering iron closer. His hand shook. A drop of sweat trickled down his forehead and sizzled on the hot metal of his forearm. He flinched, his hand jerking back. "This is impossible," he muttered, frustration welling up. He leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes with his good hand. He was in over his head. A fraud. He couldn't even manage the simplest repair. Toshinori had been wrong to choose him. He slumped forward, his head resting on the cool metal of the workbench, the shame of his failure a physical weight. He just wanted to give up. To go home. To be normal again. And that's when it happened. His HUD, which had been displaying the stable but critical diagnostic report, flickered. The amber text dissolved into a cascade of static, like an old television losing its signal. For a second, the display went completely blank. Then, a new image began to resolve itself out of the noise. It was a wireframe model, rendered in a soft, ethereal blue light. Not a model of a machine, but of a person. A woman. She was tall and slender, with a kind, gentle smile and hair that seemed to float as if underwater. A spectral, translucent hero costume clung to her form. Izuku recognized her instantly from the old newsreels and Toshinori's stories. It was Nana Shimura. The seventh user of One for All. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't just seeing her. He was perceiving her, an overlay on his reality that was being projected directly into his optic nerve by the engine. She wasn't solid, but she was undeniably there, a ghost in his machine. She didn't speak. Her kind eyes looked from Izuku's face down to his damaged arm. She floated closer, her wireframe form passing harmlessly through the soldering station. She looked at the microscopic break in the wire, then back at him. She raised a spectral hand, and a new window opened on his HUD. It was a schematic. Not a general one, but a hyper-detailed, magnified view of the very circuit he was trying to repair. Text annotations appeared beside it, written in a flowing, elegant script. Neurofeedback conduit N42S. Material, platinum iridium alloy. Melting point, 1770 degrees Celsius. Recommended solder temp, 950 degrees Celsius. A second annotation highlighted a different, seemingly unimportant component nearby. Diagnostic port 7B. Engaged to temporarily deactivate adjacent systems. Prevents risk of cascade short circuit during repair. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. He had been so focused on the break itself that he hadn't even noticed the diagnostic port. It was a safety feature, a built-in failsafe for exactly this kind of repair, and he had completely overlooked it. The spectral figure of Nana Shimura gave him another encouraging smile. She pointed a translucent finger at the diagnostic port on the schematic, then to the corresponding location on his actual arm. Then, as gently as she had appeared, she began to fade, dissolving back into the static until his HUD returned to its normal diagnostic display. Izuku sat in stunned silence for a full minute, his heart hammering in his chest. A ghost? An AI? A recorded message? He didn't know what she was, but she had just become his personal tech support from beyond the grave. All Might had mentioned the ghosts of the past users, the vestiges of their consciousness stored within the engine. He had assumed it was a metaphor. It wasn't. They were literally in the code, fragmented AI constructs built from the minds and experiences of his predecessors. One for All wasn't just a machine, it was a haunted house. A new wave of determination washed over him, extinguishing his earlier despair. He wasn't alone in this. He had help. He had 8 generations of experience logged in his own internal database. With renewed focus, he picked up a pair of fine-tipped tweezers with his left hand. Following the ghost's instructions, he located the tiny diagnostic port, and, with painstaking care, used the tweezers to flip a microscopic switch. On his HUD, a half-dozen system indicators immediately switched from green, active, to gray, deactivated. Now, with the risk of collateral damage gone, the task felt manageable. He took another deep breath, his left hand surprisingly steady this time. He brought the soldering iron in, touched it to the spool of silver solder, and deposited a single, perfect, gleaming bead onto the broken wire, bridging the gap. He held it for a second, then pulled back. He flipped the diagnostic switch back. The grayed out systems on his HUD blinked, then switched back to green. And then, a new message flashed at the bottom of the screen. Neural feedback conduit N42S, connection restored. Right arm sensory input, online. A wave of sensation returned to his right arm. Not pain, but data. He could feel the cool air of the workshop on the exposed metal of his fingers. He could feel the slight vibration of the workbench. He flexed his fingers, and this time, they twitched in response. The movement was weak, jerky, and accompanied by the protesting screech of warped metal, but it was movement. A wide, triumphant grin split his face. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had fixed something. It was one tiny wire in a sea of catastrophic failures, but it was a start. It was proof. Holy crap! The voice, loud, feminine, and buzzing with manic energy, exploded from the doorway, making Izuku jump so violently he nearly fell off his stool. The heavy industrial door had slid open, and framed in the entrance was a girl he had never seen before. She had wild, pink hair styled into what could only be described as dreadlocks, and her eyes, a strange golden yellow, were framed by crosshair-like markings in her irises. She was wearing a grease-stained tank top and a pair of heavy-duty work goggles pushed up onto her forehead. She wasn't looking at his face. Her gaze was locked entirely on his exposed, mechanically complex arm, and her eyes were wider than dinner plates. A slow, hungry grin spread across her face, revealing a full set of surprisingly sharp teeth. "What in the name of Island is that?" she breathed, her voice a mixture of reverence and pure, unadulterated glee. She took a step into the workshop, then another, moving with the predatory curiosity of a scientist who had just discovered a new species. It's my arm," Izuku stammered, instinctively trying to cover the exposed wiring with his good hand. "Don't you dare hide that masterpiece!" she commanded, rushing forward. She skidded to a stop beside him, her strange, telescopic eyes zooming in on the intricate details of his limb, her head tilting at odd angles. She was so close he could smell the scent of copper wire and burnt sugar on her. "Is that a carbon nanoweave chassis? And are those synthetic muscle fibers actuated by a localized EM field? The power conduits look like they're shielded with a bismuth alloy to reduce interference." "Oh, And is that a kinetic discharge piston? It looks like it's been through hell, but the design is magnificent. Absolutely elegant. Who's your mechanic? Is it David Shield? It has to be. This is his signature all over it. She bombarded him with a relentless stream of technical questions, her words firing off like a machine gun. She didn't seem to care that he was a person. To her, he was the most fascinating piece of technology she had ever seen. She poked a finger towards his damaged elbow joint. Don't touch that! Izuku yelped, pulling his arm back. Oh, right, sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Force of habit. I'm May Hatsum, by the way. Department of Support. She stuck out a grimy hand, which he hesitantly shook with his left. Her grip was surprisingly strong. You're the kid from the entrance exam, right? The one who one-punched the zero-pointer and then fell out of the sky like a beautiful, broken firework. I saw the whole thing from my workshop window. It was the most glorious system failure I've ever witnessed. Izuku blinked. You thought it was glorious? Of course, she chirped. Stress testing is the best way to find a design's limits. You found the limit. Now you get to make it better. Stronger. More explosions, you know, she said, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying, manic light. I could build you a new coolant system. A hyper-efficient cryogenic loop. We could probably overclock the piston's output by at least 200% with the right heat dissipation. My babies would be perfect for it. She seemed to vibrate with excitement, her mind already redesigning his entire body. He was, to her, the ultimate project. The ultimate baby, as she put it. While her intensity was overwhelming, Izuku also felt a strange sense of relief. She wasn't staring at him with pity or horror. She wasn't treating him like a freak. She was looking at his broken arm with the same analytical passion that he used to reserve for hero fights. For the first time, he had met someone who spoke his new language. I have to repair it myself, Izuku said quietly. I'm the only one with the schematics. It was the closest to the truth he could get. May's eyes somehow widened even further. You're the designer and the operator? That's incredible. A perfect feedback loop. No disconnect between the engineer and the end user. This is revolutionary, she leaned in conspiratorially. So what's the plan? You've got a massive power-to-heat ratio problem. Your primary weapon is structurally compromised, and half your servos are probably slag. Where do you even start? Hesitantly, Izuku pushed the tablet towards her. I just fixed a break in the neurofeedback loop. May grabbed the tablet, her eyes devouring the data on the screen. Ah, smart! Re-establish system communication before attempting any major hardware replacement. A solid first step. She looked from the tablet to his arm and back again. But you're going to need to completely rebuild this piston assembly from scratch. The existing housing is too warped. You'll never get a clean firing cycle out of it again. We'll need to mill a new one, she said. Izuku stared at her. Of course, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You've got the internal diagnostics, the proprietary knowledge, the ghost in your own machine. I've got access to a state-of-the-art workshop, a mastery of materials science, and a burning desire to create beautiful babies that make things go boom. She slung an arm around his shoulders, ignoring his flinch. This, my friend, is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. You provide the software, I'll handle the hardware. Together, we are going to make you the most ridiculously over-engineered hero this world has ever seen. For the first time since he'd woken up on the workbench, Izuku felt a genuine spark of hope. The road ahead was still daunting, filled with impossible challenges and painful repairs. But as he looked at May Hatsum's manic, brilliant, grease-stained grin, he realized he didn't have to walk it alone. He had the ghosts of the past to guide him, and a genius inventor by his side. The long, arduous process of diagnostics was over. The real work was about to begin. The first day of class at UA High should have been a dream come true. For 14 years, Izuku had imagined this moment, walking the hallowed halls, wearing the crisp gray uniform, sitting in a classroom surrounded by the future heroes of Japan. The reality, however, was a far more complicated mixture of exhilaration and acute, high-tech anxiety. His right arm was a work in progress. Over the past week, the UA development studio had become his second home. He and Mahatsum had fallen into a frenetic, symbiotic rhythm. He would spend hours in a meditative state, his HUD scrolling with Nana Shimura's spectral notes, and the fragmented data logs of other past users, isolating a problem. He'd then project the relevant schematic onto a workshop monitor, and May, fueled by an unholy combination of energy drinks and pure passion, would attack the physical problem with the ferocity of a starved wolverine. They hadn't been able to fully repair the arm. The catastrophic damage to the piston ram mechanism required parts they had to fabricate from scratch, a process that would take weeks. But they had managed to get the limb back to a state of basic functionality. They had replaced the burnout wiring, rerouted the damaged coolant lines, and painstakingly cleaned and recalibrated the surviving microservos in his hand and forearm. The result was an arm that worked, but was visibly and audibly a machine. To protect the delicate, still exposed components, May had built a temporary external casing out of lightweight, perforated aluminum. It was a purely functional, unpainted piece of metal that ran from his knuckles to his shoulder, held in place by a series of black synthetic straps. It looked less like a part of a hero costume, and more like a piece of industrial equipment. A soft whirring sound emanated from it as the internal fans worked to keep the patched-together systems cool, and a faint blue light pulsed from the vents, a visible sign of the engine's power flowing through the new conduits. Walking into Class 1A felt like putting his deepest secret on public display. He tried to keep his right arm held close to his body, but the casing was impossible to hide under the school blazer. Heads turned as he entered. Whispers followed him to his desk. He caught snippets. "Is that a support item? Looked like a normal arm at the exam. Did he get injured?" He sank into his seat, his gaze fixed on the scarred wood of his desk, his heart rate ticking upwards on his HUD. HR, 112 BPM. He could feel their eyes on him, their curiosity a palpable force. The loud, formal voice of the glasses-wearing boy from the exam cut through the chatter as he admonished Katsuki Bakugo for having his feet on the desk. The confrontation was a welcome distraction, drawing the class's attention away from Izuku's strange new appendage. He watched them, a flicker of envy touching him. Ida Tenya, with his powerful engine quirk. Bakugo, with his explosive, raw power. They were born for this. Their powers were a part of them, as natural as breathing. His was a secret, a burden, a machine he had to constantly monitor and maintain. Then, the door slid open, and the dreamlike quality of the day curdled into something far more intimidating. A man who looked like a walking sleeping bag shuffled into the room, took a long sip from a juice pouch, and unzipped himself to reveal their homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pro-hero, Eraserhead. His eyes, heavy-lidded and perpetually bored, swept across the room. They lingered on Izuku's arm for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else, a flicker of something unreadable in their dark depths before moving on. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down," Aizawa said, his voice a monotone drone that commanded absolute attention. "Life is short. You're all too irrational." He pulled a blue gym uniform from his yellow sleeping bag. "Put these on and meet me on the field. We're having a quirk appraisal test." The collective groan of the class was met with a dead-eyed stare. "UA is not a regular school. You'll be pushed to your limits from day one. We're taking the standard physical fitness tests from your middle schools, but this time, you'll be allowed to use your quirks, Bakugo," he said, singling out the blonde with an unnerving casualness. "What was your farthest softball throw in middle school?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." On the field, the atmosphere was tense. Bakugo stood in the throwing circle, a smug grin on his face. Aizawa tossed him a softball. Bakugo wound up, and with a guttural roar of "Die!" he unleashed a massive explosion from his palm, propelling the ball into the sky. It flew like a rocket, leaving a trail of smoke in its wake. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters, the class erupted. This was the world of heroes. The impossible made possible. "It looks fun, you say?" Aizawa's voice cut through the excitement, his tones suddenly laced with ice. "You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all going to be fun and games? How irrational." A cruel, sharp-toothed grin spread across his face. The student who ranks last in these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic ripped through the class. And through Izuku. Expelled? On the first day? His gaze dropped to his right arm. It was functional, but it was nowhere near 100%. The piston ram was offline, a melted ruin. All his high-output systems were disabled, red-flagged in his own internal diagnostics. Any attempt to use them would result in another catastrophic meltdown. He was operating at maybe 5% of his potential capacity, a fraction of what he had used against the zero-pointer. How could he compete? He watched as a girl with frog-like features aced a 50-meter dash with powerful leaps. He saw a boy with a tail use it as a third leg for stability in the sidesteps. Everyone was using their quirks in creative, powerful ways. Ways they had practiced for years. Izuku's turn for the 50-meter dash came. He stood at the starting line, his heart pounding. HR, 155 BPM. Stress, 78%. He needed an edge. Any edge. He focused inward, trying to access the engine's systems. He didn't need a massive power surge. Just a little boost. He mentally queried the system, searching for low-output kinetic enhancements. Query. Low-power kinetic assist. Accessing file. Vestige_07_Shimura_n.log. Displaying. Full cowling power distribution theory. Fragmentary. A complex diagram of the human body filled his vision, overlaid with a web of glowing blue lines representing power conduits. Nana Shimura's notes appeared beside it. She theorized that instead of concentrating one for all's immense power in a single limb for a destructive smash, it could be distributed evenly across the entire body, a low percentage output that would enhance all physical abilities without causing catastrophic damage. She called it full cowling. Her logs indicated she had never perfected it. The control required was immense. Izuku didn't have time to perfect it. He just needed to try. He closed his eyes, concentrating. He visualized the engine's core in his chest, then pictured its energy not rushing to one limb, but trickling out, spreading through the network of nanite conduits in his body like water through an irrigation system. He felt it. A subtle warmth spread through his limbs. The hum in his chest deepened slightly. On his HUD, the output gauge, which had been at a stable 1%, flickered up to 3%. A network of faint, blue lines, just like in the diagram, became momentarily visible under his skin, glowing with a soft light before fading. The starting pistol fired. Izuku burst forward. It wasn't a sonic boom, not a blur of motion. But he was faster. Noticeably faster. His legs felt lighter, his strides more powerful. The world seemed to slow down just a fraction. He crossed the finish line in 5.58 seconds. It wasn't a record-breaking time, but it was far better than his middle school average. It was enough. He hadn't broken himself. He stumbled to a halt, panting, the 3% output already putting a strain on his system. A small alert popped up on his HUD. Minor heat spike detected. Coolant systems adjusting. The whirring of the fans in his arm casing picked up speed. It was a delicate balancing act. He managed to get through the next few tests with mediocre results, using tiny, controlled bursts of full cowling. A small boost to his grip strength test. A slight enhancement to his long jump. He was staying in the middle of the pack, avoiding last place, but he was far from impressive. He could feel Aizawa's eyes on him, a constant, analytical pressure. The man knew something was off. Izuku wasn't using a quirk in any traditional sense. There was no single, obvious manifestation. Just slightly enhanced performance. Then came the final test. The softball throw. This was it. The test that most directly mirrored what he had done in the entrance exam. The test where raw, explosive power would yield the best results. He watched as Uraraka, the kind girl from the exam, touched her ball and threw it. It sailed upwards and just kept going, disappearing into the sky. Aizawa's device beeped. Infinity. Izuku's blood ran cold. How could he compete with that? A full power throw was out of the question. The piston ram was a molten wreck. Any attempt to channel that much energy through his arm would, according to his own diagnostics, result in the limb literally exploding. But a simple 3% full cowling throw wouldn't be enough. He'd get maybe 80 meters. It would almost certainly land him in last place. His name was called. He walked to the circle, the softball feeling heavy and alien in his left hand. His right arm whirred softly at his side, a constant reminder of his limitations. Midoriya, Aizawa's voice was flat. Izuku looked up. His teacher was standing a few feet away, his eyes glowing with a faint, menacing red. His long black hair was floating around his head, defying gravity. He was using his quirk. Erasure. The effect on Izuku was instantaneous and bizarre. It wasn't like a switch being flipped off. He didn't suddenly feel quirkless, because he already was. Instead, his HUD filled with a cascade of red error messages. Warning: host central nervous system link severed. Neural interface, offline. Command and control failed. Initiating safe mode. All systems disengaged. The low hum in his chest abruptly cut out. The blue lights in his arm casing died. The fan spun down. The subtle warmth of full cowling vanished. He was left feeling empty. Disconnected. It was as if his entire operating system had crashed, leaving only the base hardware. The engine was still there, a dead weight in his chest, but his ability to communicate with it, to command it, was gone. I erased your quirk, Aizawa stated, his voice a low growl. From your file and your performance in the entrance exam, it's clear you can't control your power. You have a habit of activating it at a catastrophic level, incapacitating yourself and forcing others to save you. He took a step closer, his gaze pinning Izuku to the spot. A hero who has to be saved after every single move is not a hero. He's a liability. A menace. You destroyed your own body just to pass the exam. Were you planning to do the same thing today? Forcing Recovery Girl to fix your mess every time you feel like showing off. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. Aizawa had seen right through him, to the core of his greatest fear. He was a liability. He had been reckless. I know. I wasn't, Izuku stammered, his mind racing. Aizawa thought he was just another kid with a powerful, uncontrollable quirk. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. Whatever your power is, you're useless if you can only use it once. Aizawa finished, his eyes returning to normal. His hair fell back around his shoulders. Instantly, the connection was restored. CNS link re-established. Neural interface online. Rebooting systems from safe mode. The hum returned. The lights flickered back on. The HUD rebooted, clearing the errors. Izuku could feel the engine again, a familiar presence humming in his core. Aizawa's quirk didn't nullify the power source itself. It severed the user's ability to control it. For the engine, it was like someone had unplugged the keyboard and mouse. The computer was still running, but the user couldn't give it any commands. It was a fascinating, terrifying discovery. But he didn't have time to analyze it. He had one throw. One chance to prove his teacher wrong. To prove he wasn't a one-trick pony. To prove he wasn't useless. He couldn't use a full-power piston ram. He couldn't use a full-body full cowling. He needed something else. Something focused. Something efficient. Think, Izuku, think. You're not just a brawler. You're an engineer. He accessed the engine's archives, his mind sifting through the fragmented data logs. He pushed past Nana's files, past the 5th and 6th users' combat logs. He went deeper, to the older, more arcane data. A file from the 4th user, a man named Hikid Shinomori, flickered into his view. His specialty wasn't raw power, but sensory application and energy control. His logs were filled with schematics for non-combat uses of One for All, and there, nestled in a subfolder labeled Propulsion Experiments, was a design that made Izuku's breath catch. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tool. A small, focused kinetic thruster. Shinomori had theorized about creating controlled bursts of force without needing a massive, reinforced limb to deliver them. The blueprints showed nanites reconfiguring to form a small, reinforced nozzle, venting a highly compressed blast of kinetic energy. It was perfect. Precise. Low impact. It wouldn't destroy his arm, because the force would be expelled outwards, not channeled through his bones and joints. He took a deep breath, stepping back into the throwing circle. He ignored the confused murmurs of his classmates. He ignored Aizawa's skeptical glare. He looked down at his right hand, the one in the aluminum casing. He couldn't use that one. It was too damaged, the nanite concentration too unstable. He had to use his left. He focused, his mind racing as he translated Shinomori's archaic schematics into a modern command for the engine. He pictured the nanites in his left hand, a dormant swarm in his bloodstream. He gave them their instructions. Reconfigure. Palm assembly. Designate, propulsion vent 4A. He felt a strange, tingling sensation in his left palm. The skin seemed to ripple, and a small, circular opening, no larger than a quarter, formed in the center of his hand. The edges of the opening were reinforced with a dark, metallic sheen as the nanites created the nozzle. On his HUD, the output gauge began to climb. 5%. 10%. 15%. A new prompt appeared. Propulsion vent 4A, online, ready to discharge. Set output level. He held the softball, positioning it directly over the new vent in his palm. He needed to calculate this. Too little power, and it would be a wasted effort. Too much, and the recoil could still damage his unreinforced arm. He ran a quick, instinctive physics calculation in his head, a skill honed by months of analyzing hero videos. Mass of the ball, desired trajectory, air resistance. He settled on an output of 22%. It felt right. He went into his wind-up, a motion that was pure muscle memory. But as his arm came forward, he didn't focus on throwing the ball. He focused on the final, critical moment. The release. Just as the ball was about to leave his fingertips, he sent the mental command. Execute. There was no explosion. No roar of power. Just a sharp, concussive thump, like a giant air cannon firing. A blast of pure, focused kinetic energy erupted from the vent in his palm, striking the softball at the perfect moment. The ball didn't fly. It launched. It shot forward with incredible velocity, a white blur against the blue sky. It spun wildly, stabilized by the focused nature of the blast, and sailed on a perfect arc far over the heads of the other students. Izuku stumbled back a step from the recoil, his left arm tingling with a pins and needles sensation, but there was no break. No catastrophic failure. His HUD flashed a minor warning, unexpected recoil, minor muscle strain detected, but it was green, not red. He looked at his palm. The vent was already gone, the nanites having retracted, leaving his skin completely normal. The field was silent. Everyone was staring, first at him, then at the sky, watching the ball as it finally began its descent. Aizawa's device beeped. He looked down at it, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He held it up for the class to see. 705.3 meters. A ripple of shock went through the students. 0.1 meters farther than Bakugo. He had nearly matched the explosive power of the top student with whatever that was. Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He did it. He had found a third option. Not overwhelming, self-destructive power. Not a weak, full-body enhancement, but a precise, controlled, and powerful application of the engine's true potential. He wasn't just a copy of All Might. He was something new. He glanced over at Aizawa. The teacher's face was unreadable, but the sharp, critical edge in his eyes had been replaced by something else. A deep, calculating intrigue. This student wasn't just a reckless powerhouse. He was adaptable. He was intelligent. He was rational. The last piece of the puzzle, however, was Bakugo. Throughout the entire test, Bakugo had been watching him with a simmering, confused rage. He had seen Izuku's mediocre performance, had written him off as the same useless Deku he'd always known, perhaps with some minor, pathetic quirk that had finally manifested. But this was different. This was power. Real, undeniable power. DKU! Bakugo's voice was a raw, explosive bark. He charged forward, his hands already sparking with miniature explosions. What the hell was that? You've been hiding this from me all this time? You think you're better than me? Before he could reach Izuku, gray, cloth-like bindings shot out and wrapped around Bakugo, immobilizing him instantly. Aizawa's capture weapon. Stand down, Aizawa ordered, his eyes glowing red again. Stop acting like a child. Bakugo struggled against the bindings, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury and betrayal. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was confusion. The world as he knew it had a strict hierarchy, with him at the top and Deku at the absolute bottom. That hierarchy had just been shattered. Deku, the quirkless, pebble in his path Deku, had not only gotten into Yue, but had beaten him. It didn't make sense. And what didn't make sense, to Bakugo, had to be destroyed. This power of yours, Bakugo snarled, his voice low and dangerous, straining against the capture weapon. It's not a simple strength quirk. It's not natural. That arm, the sound you made, you're cheating. That's a machine. You're cheating. The accusation hung in the air, closer to the truth than anyone knew. Izuku could only stand there, his whirring, mechanically encased right arm feeling like a brand, a symbol of the very unnaturalness Bakugo was accusing him of. Aizawa released Bakugo and turned to the rest of the class. The demonstration is over. The results are up. He projected the scoreboard. Izuku was in the middle of the pack, safe. A boy named Minoru Mineta was in last place. And I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said with a deadpan expression. It was a rational deception to push you to your limits. The class collectively lost its mind, but Izuku barely heard them. He was watching his teacher, who was watching him, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that while he may have passed the test, he had just put himself at the very top of Shota Aizawa's list of problems to solve. He was no longer just another student, he was a mystery. An anomaly. And in the logical, rational world of Eraserhead, anomalies were things that needed to be taken apart and understood. The afternoon sun streamed through the massive windows of the Class 1A classroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The nervous energy from the morning's quirk appraisal test had subsided, replaced by a low, excited buzz. They were heroes in training, and they had survived their first trial. But the reprieve was short-lived. I am coming through the door like a normal person. The booming, iconic voice of All Might echoed through the room, preceding the man himself as he slid through the doorway in a slightly too crouched, not at all normal pose. He was in his Silver Age costume, a brilliant smile plastered on his face, radiating an energy that was both infectious and, for Izuku, deeply nerve-wracking. The class erupted in a cacophony of starstruck awe. This was it. The number one hero, the symbol of peace, was their teacher. For everyone else, it was a dream come true. For Izuku, it was like having your driving instructor be the same person who secretly gave you a stolen Formula One car. He could feel All Might's gaze sweep over him for a microsecond, a glance freighted with unspoken meaning. It was a look of pride, of concern, and of a shared, monumental secret. Izuku gave a nearly imperceptible nod, trying to convey that he was okay, that the engine was stable. Welcome to the most important class at UA High. Hero Basic Training, All Might announced, striking a pose with his hands on his hips. Today, we're jumping right in with this. Combat training, he gestured to the wall, from which numbered cases began to slide out with a hydraulic hiss. And to go with that, you need these, your very own costumes, designed based on your quirk registration forms and your own requests. The room exploded again, this time with pure, unadulterated joy. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. His costume. He had submitted his design weeks before he had even inherited one for all, a simple, heartfelt homage to his idol. But after the events of the past few weeks, he had sent in a flurry of revisions, late-night emails co-written with a caffeine-fueled Mayhatsum, filled with technical specifications and material requests that must have seemed utterly bizarre to the UE support department. He found his case, number 13. It was heavier than he expected. Changing in the locker room, he felt a fresh wave of self-consciousness. The other boys were showing off the cool, flashy elements of their costumes. Kirishima's rugged, gear-like shoulder pads, Tokoyami's brooding dark cloak, Bakugo's intimidating grenade-shaped gauntlets. Izuku's was different. The base was a simple, teal-green jumpsuit, just as he had originally designed. The clumsy-looking mask with the long, ear-like protrusions and the wide, rictus-like smile was still there, a tribute to All Might's iconic look. But the similarities ended there. Over the jumpsuit, he wore a series of dark gray, high-impact polymer plates on his chest and legs. The red belt was thicker, more utilitarian, with a series of pouches containing not first-aid supplies, but specialized tools, a multi-driver, spools of wire, a miniature soldering iron, and then there were his arms and legs. The temporary aluminum casing on his right arm had been replaced with a sleeker, more form-fitting brace of the same dark gray polymer, designed by May to offer better protection and heat dissipation. It still looked overtly mechanical, with visible vents and a faint blue glow from within. His left arm was covered in a matching, though less bulky, gauntlet. And his iconic red sneakers were gone, replaced by heavy, steel-toed boots with thick, reinforced soles. May had insisted on calling them his iron soles, claiming they would be necessary to handle the recoil from future upgrades. He looked less like a classic hero and more like a field technician who was expecting a fight. It was a visual representation of his new identity, not just a powerhouse, but an engineer. Walking out into the sunlight of Ground Beta, the training ground, he felt a strange sense of rightness. The costume was practical. It was his. It was a collaboration. All Might greeted them, his smile somehow seeming to shine even brighter. They say the clothes make the man, young men and women. And behold, you are no longer students, but heroes in the making. Izuku looked around at his classmates. He saw Ida in a full suit of knight-like armor, Uraraka in a sleek, pink and black spacesuit, and Bakugo, looking every bit the walking avatar of destruction. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He was really here. He belonged. Now, let's get down to business, All Might announced. Today's trial is a 2 versus 2 indoor battle. One team will be the villains, guarding a nuclear weapon they've hidden in a building. The other team, the heroes, will have to infiltrate and either capture the weapon or apprehend the villains before time runs out. He explained the rules, then began to draw lots. The teams were chosen randomly. Izuku's stomach churned with each name called. He watched as Bakugo was paired with Ida, a terrifying combination of raw power and tactical speed. And then, his own name was called. Team A will be Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. He looked over at Uraraka, the kind girl who had saved him during the entrance exam. She beamed at him, giving him an enthusiastic thumbs up. Looks like we're a team. Let's do our best. Her simple, earnest optimism was a welcome balm to his frayed nerves. Then, the opposing team was announced. And your opponents. Team D will be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. The world seemed to shrink, the ambient noise fading away until all Izuku could hear was the low, anxious hum of the engine in his chest. Bakugo. Of course, it was Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, the one person whose explosive rage was now laser-focused on him, and the mystery of his newfound power. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was a reckoning. Bakugo's eyes locked onto his. There was no friendly rivalry in them, no sportsmanlike competition. There was only a burning, possessive fury. A promise of violence. Izuku and Uraraka stood outside the target building, a 5-story concrete monolith. All Might's voice crackled in their earpieces, giving them a floor plan of the building and 5 minutes to strategize. So, what's the plan, Deku? Uraraka asked, her cheerful demeanor barely masking her own nervousness. Bakugo seems really intense. And Ida is so fast, Izuku barely heard her. His mind was already in overdrive. He wasn't just looking at the blueprints on the small screen of the provided device. He was seeing more. He focused his will, and his HUD, now a familiar and essential part of his perception, came to life with new overlays. Initiating tactical analysis mode. Scanning, building structure blueprints. Accessing, local sensorium, audio, thermal. He was no longer just a boy looking at a map. He was a command center processing data. Okay, he began, his voice low and focused, the muttering habit from his past now a tool for external processing. Bakugo's quirk is powerful, but unsubtle. He'll most likely come straight for me. He's not the type to play defense. That means Ida will be the one guarding the weapon. He tapped the screen, highlighting a corridor. Ida's speed is his greatest asset, but it's only effective in straight lines or wide open spaces. These narrow hallways will limit his maneuverability. Uraraka, your zero gravity is our key advantage here. It's a stealth quirk. You can make yourself and any debris weightless to move silently. You can also disable Ida by touching him, removing his traction. So, you want me to go for the weapon while you handle Bakugo? She asked, her eyes wide. Exactly, Izuku said, turning his attention to his own HUD. He began to run combat simulations, pulling fragmented data from the engine's archives. He accessed the logs of the fifth user, Daigoro Banjo, a pro hero known for his hit-and-run tactics. Schematics for non-lethal restraining tools flickered through his vision. New blueprint accessed, Black Whip Prototype 0.1. Material requirements, high-tensile polymer nanites. Warning, unstable. High risk of system strain. He dismissed the warning. He didn't have time to fabricate a fully functional Black Whip, but the principle was sound. He could create simple, high-tensile lines. All Might said this is a team exercise. Izuku continued, his voice gaining confidence as the plan solidified in his mind. So let's use that. It won't be one-on-one. I'll engage Bakugo, but my goal isn't to beat him. It's to contain him. To draw him out. That will give you the window you need. He looked at her, his green eyes serious. Can you do it? Uraraka, seeing his focused determination, felt her own resolve harden. She nodded, her expression firm. Yeah. I can do it. One more thing, Izuku said, his gaze turning to the building. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the engine's sensor capabilities. The low hum in his chest intensified. Thermal imaging, active, his vision shifted. The world became a landscape of heat signatures. The concrete of the building was a cool blue, but inside, he could just make out two brighter, human-shaped signatures of orange and yellow. One was on the top floor, stationary, Ida. The other was on the third floor, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, Bakugo. He's on the third floor, Izuku said, opening his eyes. He's waiting to ambush us. We'll go in through a second-floor window. It'll throw off his approach. Uraraka stared at him, amazed. How do you know that? Just a good hero sense, he lied, tapping the mechanical casing on his arm. 2 minutes remaining, All Might's voice announced. Izuku looked at his arm, then at his left hand. The plan was sound, but it all hinged on his ability to execute his part. He needed more than a single propulsion vent. He needed versatility. He ran a quick self-diagnostic. All primary systems were stable. Coolant levels were optimal. He was ready. The alarm blared, signaling the start of the trial. Okay, Uraraka, now! Izuku commanded. Uraraka touched his back, and the familiar, disorienting sensation of weightlessness enveloped him. With a small push, they floated silently up to a second-story window. Izuku used a tool from his belt to quickly and silently unlatch it, and they slipped inside. The building was a maze of empty rooms and stark, concrete corridors. The air was cold and still. Izuku placed a hand on Uraraka's shoulder. Release, he whispered. Gravity returned with a soft thud as their boots hit the floor. They began to move, Izuku in the lead, his thermal vision cutting through the walls, tracking Bakugo's impatient movements on the floor above. They were halfway down the first corridor when an explosion ripped through the ceiling above them, raining dust and debris down. Bakugo dropped through the newly made hole, landing in a perfect crouch, a sadistic grin stretching across his face. His eyes, burning with a furious red, were locked solely on Izuku. Found you, Deku! He snarled, smoke wafting from his palms. You lying, cheating bastard! No more running! Uraraka, go! Izuku shouted, not taking his eyes off Bakugo. Uraraka didn't hesitate. She immediately turned and sprinted down the hallway, away from the confrontation. Bakugo sneered. Not even going to try and fight with your little girlfriend? Pathetic. He then launched himself forward, his right hand pulled back for a massive, wide-arc explosion. It wasn't an attack meant to capture. It was an attack meant to maim. Izuku's systems flared to life. Combat algorithm, engaged. Threat detected. He didn't try to dodge. He didn't try to run. He executed his plan. As Bakugo's explosive palms swung towards him, Izuku raised his right arm, the heavily braced, mechanical one, deploying reinforced carbon shield. The nanites swarmed. In a fraction of a second, the polymer casing on his arm shifted and expanded. Interlocking plates of a dark, matte black carbon composite formed a wide, thick shield, covering him from shoulder to wrist. The shield wasn't just a solid block. It was layered, with a honeycomb structure designed to absorb and disperse kinetic energy. It was a design he had pulled from the logs of the third user, a hero who had specialized in defense. Bakugo's explosions slammed into the shield. The sound was deafening, a concussive blast that shook the entire corridor. The force of it threw Izuku back several feet, his boots scraping against the concrete, but the shield held. His HUD flashed with warnings: impact detected, 7.8 G, minor structural stress. But the damage was negligible. He lowered the smoking, slightly scorched shield. Through the haze, he could see the look of stunned disbelief on Bakugo's face. He had taken a direct hit from his strongest opening move and was still standing, completely unharmed. "What the hell is that thing?" Bakugo breathed, his shock quickly morphing back into rage. "It's my quirk, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice steady. He needed to keep him talking, keep him focused. Keep him angry. An angry opponent makes mistakes. He pushed off the wall, but he didn't charge. He ran in the opposite direction, back towards the larger, more open rooms near the building's entrance. "Running away again, Deku?" Bakugo roared, giving chase, firing off smaller, propulsive blasts to increase his speed. Izuku's HUD became a stream of data. He was tracking Bakugo's speed, calculating the trajectory of his blasts, analyzing the structural integrity of the walls around them. This wasn't a brawl, it was a physics problem. He rounded a corner into a large, pillar-filled room. Perfect. As Bakugo flew around the corner after him, Izuku was ready. He stomped his left foot down, the iron sole clanging against the concrete. Deploying grappling line. Left wrist. A small panel on his left gauntlet slid open. A thin, dark cable, tipped with a four-pronged grappling hook, shot out and wrapped around a thick concrete pillar. He pulled, swinging himself up and over Bakugo's head in a wide arc, the movement fluid and controlled. As he flew through the air, he was already issuing his next command, deploying chaff flares. Right gauntlet. 3 small pellets shot out from his right arm, erupting in a cloud of glittering, metallic particles that filled the air between him and Bakugo. "What is this junk?" Bakugo yelled, momentarily blinded. He swiped at the air, his senses overwhelmed. Izuku landed silently behind another pillar, his mind already on the next step. The chaff wasn't just for distraction. The metallic particles would interfere with the static electricity Bakugo needed to ignite his nitroglycerin-like sweat. For a few crucial seconds, his quirk would be less reliable. "You're just using cheap tricks, Deku!" Bakugo screamed, his vision clearing. He located Izuku and lunged, his movements more erratic now, more furious. He thrust both palms forward. AP shot! Instead of a wide blast, he focused his explosion into a narrow, armor-piercing beam. Izuku's combat algorithm had already predicted this move based on Bakugo's stance. He didn't try to shield it. He dodged, the beam of concentrated light and heat searing past his head and blasting a hole in the pillar behind him. While Bakugo was locked in that animation, Izuku acted. He now had a clear objective. The goal wasn't to win the fight. It was to win the trial. In his earpiece, Uraraka's whispered voice came through. "Deku, I've found the weapon! Ida is guarding it, he's monologuing." It was time. He had to end this. He had to incapacitate Bakugo. He took a deep breath, channeling a higher percentage of the engine's power. The output gauge on his HUD climbed to 25%. The blue lights on his costume glowed more brightly. Warning, heat levels rising. Recommended output, 15%. He ignored the warning. Bakugo was turning, his face a mask of primal fury. He was preparing another blast, a bigger one. Izuku knew he wouldn't get another chance. He didn't aim at Bakugo. He aimed at the ceiling. His mind raced, performing 1,000 calculations in a single second. He analyzed the structural weak points in the ceiling, the load-bearing beams, the tensile strength of the concrete. He mapped out the debris field. He calculated the exact force needed. He was no longer thinking like a hero student. He was thinking like a demolition expert. He pulled his right fist back. The piston ram was broken, but the basic strength enhancement of the arm was still formidable. He focused the 25% output into that limb. "This is it, Kaken!" he yelled, a phrase he knew would trigger his opponent's pride and make him hold his position. Bakugo grinned maniacally. "Bring it on, you damn nerd!" Izuku didn't punch forward. He punched up. He unleashed a full, 25% powered uppercut, not against Bakugo, but against the floor of the level above them. A spider web of cracks erupted from the point of impact. It wasn't a building-destroying smash like All Might would use. It was a precise, calculated strike designed to cause a specific structural failure. The ceiling gave way. A massive section of concrete and rebar collapsed downwards, right in the space between him and Bakugo. It wasn't aimed to crush his opponent, but to create an impassable wall of rubble. "Time's up! The hero team wins!" All Might's voice boomed through the building's speakers just as the last piece of concrete settled. On the other side of the newly made wall, Bakugo stood in stunned silence, his final, massive explosion still fizzling in his palms. He hadn't been defeated. He had been outthought. Outmaneuvered. He had been treated not as a rival, but as an obstacle to be managed. The humiliation was a far deeper wound than any physical blow could have been. In the monitor room, the rest of Class 1A was speechless. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. They had expected a slugfest, a brutal clash of two powerful quirks. Instead, they had seen a masterclass in tactical thinking. "Wow," Kirishima said, his voice full of awe. "Midoriya didn't land a single punch on Bakugo, but he completely controlled the fight. He used Bakugo's own aggression against him and created opportunities for his partner. A very rational strategy." Todoroki observed, his voice a quiet monotone, though his eyes showed a flicker of genuine interest. All Might watched the screen, his permanent smile feeling a little more genuine. The boy was a marvel. He wasn't just trying to copy him anymore. He wasn't relying on the overwhelming power of the smashes. He was using the entirety of One for All. He was accessing its archives, utilizing its analytical power, and creating his own fighting style on the fly. He was a combat technician, a hero who fought with algorithms and blueprints as much as with his fists. He looked down at his own hands. For generations, they had treated One for All like a hammer. A magnificent, world-changing hammer, but a hammer nonetheless. This boy, the ninth user, was the first one to realize he had been handed the entire toolbox. As Izuku and Uraraka walked back into the monitor room, they were met not with the simple praise he had expected, but with a barrage of questions. "Midoriya, your shield! And that grappling hook! Are those part of your quirk? How do you create them?" Yaoyorozu asked, her analytical mind already trying to deconstruct what she had seen. "And the way you predicted Bakugo's ambush was incredible," Kirishima added. Izuku froze, suddenly realizing the corner he had backed himself into. He had shown them too much. His quirk didn't just seem powerful, it seemed impossible. It was a strength enhancer, a construction tool, a sensory power, and a tactical computer all in one. It didn't fit any known quirk classification. It's all part of it," he stammered, falling back on the only explanation he had. "It's versatile." He avoided looking at Aizawa, who was leaning against the back wall, having silently entered to observe. The man's face was unreadable, but Izuku could feel the weight of his analytical gaze, a gaze that was no longer just curious, but deeply suspicious. The final, and most brutal, confrontation came after the trial. He found Bakugo in one of the empty prep rooms, simmering in a silent, volcanic rage. "Kaken!" Izuku started. "Don't!" Bakugo cut him off, his voice dangerously low. He didn't turn around. "I lost today. That's all. But don't think for a second this is over." He finally turned, and the look in his eyes made Izuku's blood run cold. The confusion and rage were still there, but now they were forged into something new. A cold, hard certainty. "That thing you have, that's not a quirk," Bakugo said, his voice barely a whisper. "Quirks are a part of you. They're wild. They're messy. You bleed when you overuse them. You don't whir and glow and shoot out wires like some goddamn toy. He took a step closer, jabbing a finger at Izuku's chest. You've got something else. Something you were given. And I'm going to find out what it is. And then I'm going to beat it. I'm going to prove that my power, my real power, is stronger than whatever cheap, second-hand trick you're using. With that, he shoved past Izuku and left. He hadn't been defeated and humbled. He had been given a new purpose. A new rival. A new mystery to solve and destroy. Izuku stood alone in the empty room, the whirring of his own arms suddenly seeming very loud in the silence. He had won the battle, but he had opened up a dozen new fronts in a war he didn't know how to fight. His secret was safe, for now. But he had a terrifying feeling that the walls were beginning to close in.